Where's Peter?
I was about to speak to that. Let me put it on pause, actually. Resume recording. Good morning, Sunday morning. So,
that's a table chair. Okay.
I want to check in with people. What I want to do this morning is I want to do a little check-in. I'm hoping that will be brief, but do what we got to do. Then what I want to do is share a few of my responses to Jade, and I want to keep that as brief as possible, but just so that you know what's on my mind in response. And then the third one is to go back into practice. And for that, I want to ask you guys a little bit about what you want, okay? But we'll put that off for a moment. I also, you'll see up here, this is something to take advantage of over the course of the day. It's titled Last Weekend Desires. So I'm going to invite you, during breaks or whatever, just scribble some things up here as they occur to you. So I wanted to put this up here, and it might end up being behind a piece of paper, so find it, just so that, I don't think of a thing you want now in the next 2 minutes, and you're like, I can't think of anything. I know there are things I want. So, and it's not your last chance. If you think of something tomorrow or next week, shoot me an email as well. But I want to, if there are things that feel missing or you really want to take another look into. So that's going to be there. So I do want to check in. In the morning, we did our check-in, and we all noticed we were already activated from the Tuesday night before a little bit. Some people more than others. I did a little bit of my response to Jade. Then we did 2 constellations. The one over there had some interesting things happen that were challenging for many of the participants. And I just really want to name that because that energy was in the room a bit. And then we went straight into lunch. And then we came back and we worked with Jade. And there was more activation. And then there was that kind of gorgeous 5-star piece of work you all did. And I just really, I want to honor you guys. From the place of jitteriness that was in the room up until then, and the capacity to receive from that constellation that you all, I know this is, people don't usually get 5 stars, good receiving. Right? Usually it's, that was nice for sharing or giving or taking care of somebody else, right? But good receiving, good taking. Truly, I was kind of in awe of it. It was really spectacular. And Jade and I are aware, and I've mentioned with you, that it's a little bit of a challenge, and this is for me, this is my learning going forward, having our main teacher on trauma be disembodied. That's not the best planning in the world. It's working. Talking about disembodiment.
It's working. It's okay. I felt her presence very strongly.
Yeah. It is requiring me to do a little extra work on my end for holding the embodiment piece. And the work I didn't have to do in Fulker. Because he was a body.
Yeah. Right.
Also, he didn't have his triggering material.
Right.
So at any rate, so that's the overview. Just briefly, how are people? I just want to take the temperature a little bit.
I can start.
And then you're not required to share, it's just whatever needs to be said. I really don't want to do a fulsome check-in.
Okay.
But just, I want to take the temperature a little bit. And
Yeah.
people are,
I can start.
Go ahead.
I'm feeling really good emotionally. I'm a little tired physically because I'm not interrupted sleep with the baby. But I really feel, the exercise was really resourceful. I was practicing a little bit with Amy with couples today. how I was able to, how the patterning with like my husband changed, that I was able to come home and he wasn't, so we both kind of avoidant types. And we have this dynamic where he starts to avoid and I start to collapse because, well, maybe I'm anxious, but I want to reach and he wants to withdraw. And I have this like pain in my belly. I basically like collapse internally. And last night I didn't do that, which was a great feeling. Because I felt so resourced and connected to life. And if I have life behind me, it's okay that he's not, I'm not like a little child wanting him to save me from my pain of losing my mom. I'm a resourced adult who has like life connected to her, and I'm much bigger. And I was okay with that. I'm okay with it. He's not able to connect right now. So it was a new experience for me. And I just want to acknowledge, last night I was also tired, so I wasn't able to speak to the impactfulness of this exercise. So I want to acknowledge that it was transformational. It was very impactful and powerful for me.
Awesome.
And it changed right away the patterning I had with significant other, which is huge.
Well.
Yeah. Okay, we can all go home now.
Okay. My work here is done.
We can all go home as long as we go with her.
Yeah, I figured one person's healed, you know.
Be healed.
Yeah.
Where's the Kleenex?
Right next to Jack. Anybody else? Temperature check-in?
I feel good.
Oh, sorry.
I thought the exercises yesterday were really beautiful. It did have me wondering, well, what else is there to do today? I'm sure Jade have stuff planned, but it is.
Sure, Jade has something planned.
But it just felt so full. It's like I don't need anything else after that. That's kind of how it felt. I mean, I'm really happy to be here, and I'm sure we'll do more stuff. But it was like, wow, that was, right. That was enough right there.
Cool.
So.
By the way, I'm not feeling good is also fine. I just want to make sure people,
Yes.
any responses are fine here. And glad for the good feelings.
I felt good when I was leaving last night. I felt fine. And then I found myself dragging my feet and not being able to think about coming back today.
Mm.
So I'm like, what is that? Because pieces of the information yesterday are like floating concepts still to me. A lot of them. Yeah. And, the thing we were anticipating that our own personal traumas were going to get hugely triggered and the whole room would be full of it all day. That wasn't what we did. But I was like, well, my own questions about my own trauma, I guess, are not being answered yet.
Could you name your question into the room?
The question?
Yeah, just so we hear the question.
How does this, how do you channel this into an individual with trauma to use the best parts of what we were doing yesterday?
You implied a question about your own trauma. What's your question about your own trauma? Because I have those questions for Jade. I've emailed them to her.
Oh, okay.
So hopefully we're going to get more of that concretely.
I don't really have a question about it. I just have this overwhelm. Because everything made sense, and then, that was some kind of an effort. That was a mental effort that made sense out of it. And, I know you were sent out that thing about the shadow in that workshop.
Oh,
and I looked,
sorry.
I looked at that and I went, okay, well, it seemed like yesterday, when I was feeling the best about being here was, like, there weren't any shadows in the room. And shadows were a choice. And I looked at all that and I went, well, no, they're not exactly. Mm-hmm. And the whole Jungian idea that that's where the richness is and that's where you, as an artist, you pull so much material and power, raw power out of the shadow zone. And so I felt like I was making an effort to be in the light, and there was something in that panel about you're not trying to go towards the light, you're trying to see the shadow, see what's in the shadows. That it's an airy-fairy idea that you're just going to try to go towards light, and the shadows will be gone. So, yeah.
So it sounds like you're more or less agreeing with the message of the panel, but you're also going, God damn it. Just being in the light for the little bit was kind of nice.
Well, yeah. The person I'm staying with was talking about taking an online class, and I said, yeah, I've overcome a lot of my resistance to doing online work. But and at some point she said, well, my work's about learning how to do stitching on the edge of my felting. And you're trying to save yourself. And I went, really? That's why I'm here? So, yeah. I think it made me feel pathetic to hear that.
You're not doing a constellation. I just want to include this, okay? Would you help me for a second? Would you just go and stand in the corner for a second? And we're not doing a constellation. This is just to include something, okay? All right? And you can face us, Guy. Yeah. Jean-V made a gesture. I'm just feeling overwhelmed. When people do that, I'm wondering what's back there. Those gestures are not accidents. They're not mere metaphors. There's an element, okay? So that's whatever that is. And I've got it as far away from Jean-V as possible. I would like everyone here you don't have to look if you don't want to. You can look if you want to. But everyone else on Jean-V's behalf, just look at that and see it. And Jean-V, I want you to receive other people seeing it for you. So less of looking at it and more at looking at them seeing it.
Right.
All of us. And then what I would like everyone, except for Jean-V, I want you to watch us do this. The deepest bow. Do whatever that is. Just a nice deep bow. And you, Jean-V, you just watch us do it. And then come back. And just in a circle, we'll start with Jeff. You're just going to say to Jean-V, point at that and say, I see that.
I see that.
We'll just go around.
I see that. I see that.
I see that.
I see that.
And just say, it is good for you all to see it on my behalf.
It's good for you all to see it on my behalf.
I'm too small.
I'm too small.
Yeah. And everyone go, yeah.
Yeah.
And then Guy, step out of the role. Come on back, big Guy. And Guy, you look at Jean-V and say, hi, I'm Guy. I represented that.
I represented that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Uh-huh.
sometimes we can't do a big piece of work, but what we've got to do is just find a way to include something that's knocking on the fucking door, right? And we don't have time to deal with it, or space. We've got to go to work. We've got to take care of the kids. We've got to do things, or we just don't have the bandwidth, or whatever. But just enough to be able to say it's included. Yeah? And I do invite you in any way that this is useful as a tool. You know? Just this, personally and as a facilitator. I have to assume no miracle cure, but how are you doing?
Man, I'm still trying to figure out what triggered it. But
So
better.
how are you now?
Maybe better, but kind of still in the mystery. Yeah.
The other thing I just want you to plug into a little bit was the respect with which everyone held that.
Yeah.
As a little bit of correction to the feeling of patheticness. Who here has felt pathetic in their stuff at some time? Oh my God! Can I get over this stuff?
Here it is again.
And having some respect for ourselves and for each other would be very useful. Okay, somebody else. Thank you, Jean-B.
Yeah, can I have the next one, please?
I felt good about the exercise we did yesterday with life. So I thought I was feeling pretty good. And then I did not sleep well at all. I'm like kind of out of it today. And I also think that I kind of like wrote it out, but that I was probably more bothered than I realized about there being an abandonment in my constellation yesterday.
Yeah. So I do think this. We just need to name this briefly. Would that be okay with you? In the constellation that was for Christina, something arose between Guy and Peter. And Peter stepped out of the role somewhat suddenly. And so Christina and I were chatting about this before you came in. And she had some questions about that, which they're technical facilitating questions there. But I did interrupt her and say, and this is all 2020 hindsight, right? If something like that happens, it's perfectly okay as the client to say, something is up between a couple of people and I think it's taken over the constellation and I don't think I want a constellation anymore right now until that gets resolved.
Yeah.
That would have been just fine. Now I do understand you all are trying to be cooperative with each other and be a place for each other's learning. But if something arises in a constellation where it's clear that there's the constellation dynamic, that's one systemic thing. And then there's another systemic thing happening in the room, whatever it is. If someone's throwing up suddenly, right, is suddenly sick, maybe that needs to take precedence over the constellation for a few minutes until that person gets taken care of. Or an earthquake happens. Maybe you all want to leave the room rather than try and plow through the constellation. I'm exaggerating a little bit here for the point of life. And everyone, it doesn't happen very often, but something does arise in the room. Someone has a coughing attack, or someone comes in a really boisterous way a little late. And I'll just say, hey, everyone, let's pause until this resettles back down. Because we can't do what we're doing in the presence of this other perfectly legitimate, fortunate or unfortunate, or whatever it is, systemic thing that's happening. And so the guy apparently, dutifully soldiered on to try and make it work on Christina's behalf. But that particular thing that arose was too much in charge for the rest of the process. And that was pretty ouchy for Christina. And I can imagine it would be pretty ouchy. Particularly since the person who left the Constellation was representing her.
Mm.
Yeah. Now, because we're all facilitators here, we'll also ask really interesting questions about this Christina systemics that arose in that moment and that were present there. That's probably a situation where we as facilitator or client or whatever want to say, something else is more in charge now than the Constellation. Let's not try and plow through. Okay. So let me turn it back to Christina. Yeah, sorry, I should have more than one box, clearly.
Yeah.
How you doing?
I mean, I didn't feel a lot of emotion then.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of these things that our reactions are delayed. It's not an unuseful coping mechanism. And sometimes we wish we could have acted in the moment, though, in hindsight, if we'd had it available. So how are you doing now?
I'm frustrated by it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I feel like I stopped being the, focus.
The client, yeah.
And it was, I guess, in a little way, there's kind of a betrayal.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it resonates with all the other abandonments and whatnot. And if Guy had been able to say, well, I think there's something else that's more important, not more important, but more dominating right now, you probably wouldn't have felt betrayed or abandoned. Right? You said, oh,
Well, at the time I
that is
didn't.
happening.
At the time I was like, oh, okay, this little squabble is happening that is
Yeah.
Pretty outside of what we're talking about here.
Mm-hmm.
And, kind of part of this group who has a hard time representing and not leading.
Yeah. Yeah. And you did feel it at the time, you just didn't notice it until later. Right? Yeah. Yeah. So let me check in with you. How are you feeling? And we'll even check in with Jeff about it because he was a witness to the whole thing.
I'm really sad to hear that. And I get it, and, for my part, as you say, my intention was to do everything I could to maintain so that Christina felt held, even though that was happening, no matter what I did. So my soldiering on was my attempt to continue to hold the container for Christina.
I felt that. I know that's what you did.
Yeah.
And sometimes, this is really good learning. Sometimes we can't. Right? Becoming systemically intelligent is noticing when there's a systemic going on that, the classic elephant in the room, right? That we're not going to soldier on, or at least find a way to give a nod to if we can't actually, for whatever organizational reason, we can't confront it or whatever. But remember, the systems always win. Yeah. Yeah. It's like, my nature constellations, the sun moves and we end up being in the sun and we're all hot and sweating. We're in the middle of a constellation and I don't want to interrupt it. And then I finally see everyone's uncomfortable and distracted. And I go, oh, for God's sake, let's put this on pause and move the whole group into the shade. And everyone's like, oh, we can do that? Yeah, we can do that. You know?
And I just want to say, I share your sense of frustration,
Mhm.
and without saying more.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because we're here to notice just what's going on, right? And to be resourceful in the face of it as facilitators. And to give ourselves freedom, it's I say this and it's so tricky, right? Stopping a constellation could be standing in our no. Like, I don't think my constellation's going on right now, so I'm going to ask us to stop this, right? Or it could be an act of aggression in a different situation, right? I don't like what's going on here. I don't want to do this anymore, right? So there's like no generalities, right, that we can kind of like in terms of what one should or shouldn't do in a particular situation. I'm inviting you more and more into some kind of trust of your body, some capacity to look at it from multiple layers, and to notice the systemics we're present to, and respond as resourcefully to those systemics as we possibly can.
Are you speaking generally now, or are you speaking?
Yeah. Oh, totally generally.
Because I'm wondering like which systemics were present. Like in my situation, it feels like there was like at least 3 levels.
Well, but systems are always, part of the rule of systemics, right, is that, let's not write on this, if you want to leave that for writing desires, is that you can look at the planet, or you can look at the solar system, or you can look at the galaxy, right? There's always, systems within systems, right? So what are you planning to look at? So yeah, we're having a criteria about what's most important to include or see or notice. In this instance, we had your constellation and your system, right? That's focused on whatever your question was, right? Or what you asked for in the constellation. So we're not looking at everything in Christina's life and system, but that which sort of orbits around the question or request that you had for the facilitator. And then we had this other sort of dynamic that arose between a representative and the facilitator, right? And now this is in the same space as this, right?
Right, and in that space, I can sit with like, is this separate or is this me?
Yes. Right? It's both. It's always both. That's part of what's so confounding about it.
And on some hand, I recognize that, and on another hand, I have a little resistance to that because it's like, I don't have to take on everyone else's shit.
Yes.
I don't have to make that, oh, this must be my story.
Right.
So that may be more important than, I don't know, whatever I did to like make it okay.
Yep. and a really clean sense of, so I have this constellation, I have this question, this is about me and my question and what I need and what I want here. This has arisen. It might be a reflection of me and what I want, but it's not helping out. And it's interfering with this right now. And so I'm going to ask for us to stop this right now so that this can be dealt with.
It didn't feel clear to me that it was separate until, well, it did and it didn't. I don't know.
Well,
it
it's
took a while.
because life is mushy. It's not completely separate, right? Right? I mean, in a month, if I sit down and say, that crazy thing that happened in your constellation, how does that reveal something about you in your life? From a really clean place, you'll be able to answer that question. But that's not something that you should be asked to do in the middle of this constellation, right? Because you're being vulnerable, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I can look back at when I got into a conflict at St. Michael's Church, and they ended up throwing me out in 2006. That's over 10 years ago, where they were complete assholes, and they were very mean to me, and I can see how it reveals my own systemics, and how in some ways I created that experience. But that's something we do with a lot of distance, and a lot of perspective, and a lot of healing, yeah? Another aspect of trauma patterning, right? We're in the land of trauma here, is constantly asking ourselves, how is it my fault? That's something that can come out of a trauma experience, right? How is this my fault? And the New Age thing about how everything that happens to you is a manifestation of your thoughts.
You attract it.
There's a core truth there. And it can be totally turned into this thing. Oh, the fact that my boss, pinches my ass. How am I attracting that into my life? That sort of stuff, right? It can get so distorted, right? And the place where from some distance I can look at St. Michael's and say, wow, there are ways I kind of created that experience is also useful, right? Yeah. But I'm holding it really differently from how is that all my fault? It's a completely different energy. Yeah. So in the moment, it would have been very fair for you, but hard for you to do because you're already in the vulnerable client role. It would have been more Guy's job, but he's learning, so it's in his place of learning, right? And everybody's here, place of learning as a facilitator, right? To be able to say and notice, oh, there's an earthquake in the room. I think we need to, end the constellation and put a pause on it and deal with that for a while. Or, a conflict has arisen between the facilitator and a representative. Maybe that needs to be attended to before we go on with this constellation. As the client, this is completely not yours. It's not our client's responsibility to figure that out. It is fair for them to tell us, if they're sort of in there, and they say, hey, I think there's something else going on in the room. Could you please stop facilitating? A client could do that, but it's not their job to figure that out. They're in their stuff. We're the facilitator. It's our job to notice that. Yeah? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to point out that, as you said, hindsight is 20/20.
Exactly. We're all in learning mode here.
And the thing is that, like, if I had just said, oh, hang on, we got to pause this whole thing while I go deal with this, that's another level of abandonment.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, whatever is going on with you is not as important as now this interpersonal thing that has arisen, and we're just going to put that to the side, and that could have been experienced as another level. I'm not trying to defend myself. I'm just saying I don't know.
Yeah.
Like what?
Right.
I don't know if there was a winning move, so to speak.
Right, and I'm actually, there might not have been no version, which, first of all, I want to be really clear, there was no abandonment. it lands on Christina's abandonment. And we want to avoid those kind of abandonment moves, right? This is why when someone's really troublesome in a workshop, I think long and hard before I ask them to leave the workshop, because the resonance in the room is going to be intense if I have to do that. So I will do everything I can to rope somebody into the group, if I can, before I ask, I'm really sorry, but you're not playing well with others. I think I need to ask you to leave, right? At that point, there's probably no perfect move, right? What you do need to ask yourself is whether, this is a very simple question, is a constellation possible now? Yeah?
Yeah, I don't think any of us knew the answer to that.
Right?
I mean,
Yeah. And it's a new question for us to sort of ponder a little bit. Yeah? Right? It's a new question. Yeah? And we only know the answer to this one in hindsight.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to put on everyone's menus as a facilitator that asking that question and stopping a constellation is an option that's in service to your client. Yeah? And maybe that disturbance that was going on in the room wasn't as big as I thought it was. Yeah? And I stopped it for no reason. You're right. It could have been, right, a different, bad choice. But being willing to ask that, is a constellation possible now? If you have to stop a constellation, which is rare, and by the way, you probably, at some point, you're going to see a facilitator. I mean, it happened to me with Francesca Mason Boring. We were in the middle of and it's happened twice with me. Judith Hemming did the same thing. The whole thing was sort of splayed out, and they're like, I think that's all we can do with that. Everyone go and sit down. And I was like,
Because you weren't done.
I didn't feel done. I felt we were in the middle of something. We were in the middle of something. But, there are times when facilitators will say, we've done what we can do with this constellation. We're going to have to stop. You want that on your menu too, a rare item, a rare sort of thing. If you have it on your menu, your client will feel better. And it's not a conscious thing by any means. But if in the energy of the facilitator, there's the energy, I have to do this no matter what, there's tension in the system. Mm-hmm. There's tension in the system. So if it's on the menu for I can stop this constellation, that wouldn't be my first choice or my second or my fifth. But in a rare circumstance, I might stop the constellation, right? Okay. And then if I were in that situation, I'm still left with 20 choices of what to do next. There isn't an obvious next thing to do either, right? I was helping out with this constellation. I wasn't as available as I normally am, right? So I want to give everyone 5 stars for lots of learning over there yesterday. And I invite Christina and all of us, because I've gotten really caught in the place Christina's in right now around if something's in part a reflection of something in me, am I causing it all? It comes back to your word, pathetic. It's the shame move when we face these things. It's a different version of it. It's the, Jade was talking about it yesterday.
Shame is a real showstopper.
It's a showstopper. It's powerful stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And when it shows up, it means that we're in our trauma patterning and in our reaction to something. Our shame is never telling us the truth about what's going on. Even if, the facts are correct, the deeper emotional meaning of the system isn't correct, right? Yeah. And it's very old. It's old. The shame response is a child's response. It's old stuff. Yeah.
I have a question.
1 second. Give me 1 second. I want to hear your question. Hold on 1 second. How are you doing? I'm trying to do some teaching and soothing in here in the middle of what I know is really raw for you.
I don't like talking about shame. So I think when you brought that up, it set me off again a little.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't my fault.
Mm-hmm. And the wrestling with the was it my fault, it's not my fault, all that stuff could be just off, like having to say it's not my fault is part of this wrestling. It's obviously not your fault. It's like, at some level, it's like nobody's fault. It's definitely not your fault. The question is, what's the it? It's not Christina's fault. Of which this was all very painful reflection.
Oh, I could apply it to like all the 3 layers of what's going on. My system, their system, this group dynamic.
Yeah.
It's like not just one field of energy happening that I can clearly pinpoint,
Yeah. How are you feeling right now?
I'm glad I brought it up.
I am too. That was messy yesterday.
It sat with me in a place that was not very conscious.
Yeah. And just a bookmark for anybody. If the representative for the client gets up and walks away, you probably want to stop the constellation, just as a rule of thumb.
Yeah.
That's big.
Yeah.
That's where it's slowing down and getting your feet back underneath you as the facilitator, checking in with the client and say, how was it for you that just happened? Maybe checking in with the representative, maybe not, who knows? I mean, if they ran across the street, you may not be able to check in with them. Checking in with the group, just slowing down. That's a big that's a big move. That has big impact. It's one thing if Poland runs out of the room, right? But if the representative for the client leaves, that's a big deal.
I don't
So, yeah, go ahead.
Well, no, I mean, one, I'm glad that we got a useful generalization.
Yes, one useful generalization.
One useful generalization.
Yeah.
2, yeah, that's a god dang useful generalization, because honestly, in the moment when Peter got up and just got out, I don't even know that it really registered with me. Oh my God, that's Christina's representative. I was just in like,
Yeah.
Okay, I don't know what's happening, but I need to like somehow hold this container still, and it like there was a level where I was kind of like in shock and kind of like, unresourced in a sense to even notice that.
One more useful generalization, if you feel that happening, and that happens for all of us at some time, right? I've got to like put the seatbelts on kind of moment. Then yes, do whatever you got to do and reconnect with the client. That's kind of the next move.
Yeah.
Because if you're doing a lot of work to keep yourself in the driver's seat, right, then there's almost an automatic loss of rapport just because you're efforting so much, right?
No, that's a really good call out.
Yeah, and then just let me reconnect and like because the client is highly even if they're feeling chill in the moment, mostly chill in the moment, highly unlikely to not notice that it was them that walked out. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll I'll name something else that just is now occurring to me, which is there was, in just trying to keep the seatbelt on and hold the container and not paying attention to you and being in rapport, there was a way where I felt responsible and shame for whatever I might have contributed to having that occur, and was like doing my best to non-confront my shitty facilitation that might have helped source that. Which in the course of doing my own non-confrontation with my own shitty facilitating that led to that outcome, completely dropped you as the client from a rapport perspective. So then there's that. Yeah, okay.
So rapport with self. Ask everyone to just find their shame part. Pat on the head. Give it a little love. It's doing the best it can. It's there for a reason. It just drives us nuts. A lot of it may need to go back to previous ancestors because it's not even ours. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to do another little tiny thing here. Would you do something for me? Just go over to the door, if you would.
You had a question too.
Yeah, and I want to come back to that. But I want to, so step into the role of Christina in the Constellation yesterday. And then come back into the circle. All the way in the middle of the circle, so this Christina can see you.
What was your?
Christina from yesterday,
Okay.
the representation, and just say, I'm here.
I'm here.
So look at Christina and say, I'm here.
I'm here.
Thanks. What was important about me didn't leave.
What was important about me didn't leave.
And then you take the representation back into yourself. You step back into being Jeff. And if you'll just say to her, I'm Jeff, I represented you.
And Jeff, I represented you.
I just wanted to bring you back.
That was nice.
Yeah. Okay. Jeff, you had a question? I don't know if you bookmarked it or not.
Well, when you were talking about possibly stopping constellations, the question that came to my mind, seemed obvious to me, was, is there something, does this really need to stop, or is it just that I don't know what to do next? Or does it even matter?
Doesn't matter too much. I mean, obviously, given everything we've been doing about the unknown, if you simply don't know what to do, which happens all the time, that can't be a basis, right? Because not knowing what to do is critical to good facilitating.
Well, by that I mean I don't know. Well, I'm totally lost. I don't know what move to make, what question to ask. You know, I just don't know what to do next. Therefore, in my mind, I'm not moving the constellation or helping the constellation move.
So for the purposes of learning and in a student environment, I would advise you to sit down and be with how that feels and what that's like, and then keep going. You know? You can check in with your client and say, I'm really lost right now and feeling a little overwhelmed. Are we okay? And that little bit of rapport is probably going to be all they need to say, go for it, Jeff. Right? But if you keep stopping facilitating, when you get to that place, you're never going to finish facilitating. It's going to teach your system to stop. Right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there's no reason to blow anybody's circuits out. I remember one NLP session I was doing. I usually felt very confident doing NLP, but it was the first time where I was like into it with a client with a TA watching, and it just stopped. Everything stopped. Who are you? It just stopped. Everything. And I just turned to the TA and I said, nope, done. And he said, I can see that. And he finished the piece of work. So this is not a bad thing to have happen, just so you find your own limits and laugh at yourself at the end and get what you need. But please don't plow through what is obviously present. Someone's getting sick in the middle of the floor. You have a representative who's doing too much. It's getting too much. Like, just deal with what is. Be present to and deal with what is as a facilitator. Yeah, to the degree that that's even available. We've done a lot of checking in. Thank you, Christina. These two have not checked in. I just want to check the temperature. Want to make sure we're not excluding anyone. And I wanted to say a few words about yesterday, of which some of them have already been said.
I don't have much to report.
How are you doing?
Pretty
You're
good.
okay? We're all very curious what's going underneath the jacket. What's really going on underneath there?
I very rarely get triggered by anything that I hear.
The desire for the last weekend is find out what's going on underneath Jeff. And he turns color, so something's going on.
Yeah, you are
And then tell me.
We all love you so much. Thank you, Guy.
Yeah, last night was a little hard. I don't know, kind of at loose ends, didn't really have anything to do. Did a little bit of shopping, came home, watched another episode of Osho, of the Wild, the Netflix documentary about the Osho thing, which is great.
I found that very triggering.
So which thing? We should talk about
Yeah,
that.
well, you think about it from the perspective of someone who's actually lived in a couple of intentional communities with some fairly significant culty overtones. Anyway, interesting.
Yeah.
And
This is a documentary on Netflix about the
Rajneeshi
Rajneeshi community up in
Yeah.
Oregon.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It's really cool.
Very interesting. Yeah, and just really kind of cycling just above. What do they call it in NLP when you're flapping the baseline?
Flapping.
Baseline, kind of baselining. I like, a little bit above baselining around just, the hopelessness or whatever around, whatever dating and blah, 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 and all that sort of stuff. I'm going through a dating app, and there's my ex. Boom! And
Literally, she's in it.
yeah, apparently she broke up with the guy that she was dating for like 8 months or something.
She's
I don't know.
in one of the apps.
She's on one of the dating sites, on
Oh.
the dating app.
Oh, sorry.
She's not it.
It comes
Yeah,
up
the
as a
show.
match, as a match
Yeah.
for you.
Although she could have.
No, it came up, and I'm just like, so grief, loss, despair, hopelessness, anguish. I managed to put myself to bed, but in the middle of the night, I was heavily crashed. Like, I was going down hard, going to some pretty dark places, and very under-resourced. Like, I was like, even though I have amazing healing tools at my disposal, I'm just kind of like, where do I even begin? I was just buried. I was buried. And the only thing I could think of to do, and even though the healing tools that I have and the vortex healing stuff, it's effectively a form of prayer because it's sourced from divinity. So it's like effectively a form of prayer. But I wasn't able to say, okay, now I'm gonna do this transmission to do this. It was just, I had no resource for that. I was buried hard and crashed. And all I could do is basically just a very simple prayer, like reaching out to the divine source of my lineage and saying, help.
The first prayer.
And something shifted. Like, within half an hour, something shifted. And I'm pretty clear that I didn't do anything. So, and it's still like, fuck. So, anyway, I'm here.
Yeah. Now I'm doubly impressed by what you all managed to do in the second half of yesterday.
Yeah.
And this gives us so much respect for our clients and what they're wrestling when they come to us and say, I just want a good job, or I want a girlfriend, or I want, to not be depressed. Like, it's not just their mindset, and there's this neurological history that's gotten them to where they are now, but it's compelling stuff. So thank you, everybody. Yeah.
So yesterday she used the term systemic and somatic sandwich. Remember her saying that?
Yeah.
I was like, that is really amazingly evocative. Good way of feeling about this.
Yeah.
It's like you're never
coming
just
from both sides.
You're never just having, kind of an experience that isn't connected. Can't get out of connection.
That was interesting. That was the experience I had when she had us do that little exercise around the connected unknown.
Yeah.
When I stepped into it, I felt like a node connected to other nodes. I felt really, really like
It's company.
no,
It's good company.
I wasn't a center. I was one of many centers. But this is for good or for ill, right? It means we're also connected to World War II.
Oh, everything. Yeah.
And slavery. And,
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to offer up just a couple of pieces of teaching that are important. Sorry for the folks here. If you need to shift for a moment, feel free to do that. So, in constellations, I hope what you're getting a sense of is there's kind of two ways in which what she's teaching us can be useful. One is, and this is kind of what came up this morning, how you work with the client. right? In a trauma-informed way, right? So rapport and all the other tools to help them regulate, to get information from them, to find out how they're doing. Are they regulated? Are they dysregulated? You know, all that stuff, right? It's just, this is the piece that you don't need to know any constellations to do, right? It's just how you work with the client. And by the way, also how you work with the representatives. You need to stay in rapport with the representatives and with the constellation itself, right? So it's just being trauma informed changes how we interact with the client. And then there's, in the constellation itself, if we put it in, you know, constellating trauma. So it's the content of the constellation. And you got an example of that last night, right? Not in a direct way. She was actually trying to like do the anti-trauma, right? With the reaching and all that stuff, right?
Yeah.
But this is, you know, when we put in war or a disrupted relationship between a child and a parent, or a tragic accident in the family, you know, all those things. It's in the context of working in a constellation with trauma as it appears as content in a constellation. She hasn't talked about this so much. It is the bread and butter of constellation work. You've all been doing this work, right? Mm-hmm. There's a way in which we don't need the word trauma in order to do what we do in constellations all the time, right? Having knowledge about and being informed about trauma and attachment will help you work better with, you know, the things that arise that were traumatizing in the family system. Yeah. I've asked her to focus a little bit more on this today. Okay. But you know, everything you've already been doing, healing sentences, putting out all the dead so that they can be seen rather than secret, including things, naming things, you know, moving the parent away from the child and closer to the partner so that the relationship is proper again. I see you now. I didn't see you before, but I see you now. These are all, you know, the kinds of things, in some sense, in this sense, you don't change anything, but now you're more aware of them as they arise. So the question is in the exercises that she was doing, how were these things showing up? Mostly this, how you work with the clients. So the things that I really noticed that we were kind of co-facilitating a little bit as a way to think about what we were doing, because especially the first round, we were both doing a little bit of stuff. The second one, she did more. But first of all, the thing that I most noticed, she slowed everything way down. Right? There was no push or force or hurry. You know? She let it unfold. She gave it space. One of the worst things you can do to yourself or to someone else who's getting re-triggered is try and force things along. Let's get efficient here, right? So space. Also, what she mentioned was giving people choices. If you want to reach now, you can reach. If you don't want to reach, you don't have to reach. If you want to move your position, you can move your position. Well, you know, yeah. So making sure that the body knows it has options. It's got an escape route, even if it doesn't use the escape route. It's got a way out. It has ways to say no, as well as to say yes. Yeah. So that. The other piece that, if it's all right, can I speak a little bit about your experience when you were I was sitting there wanting a better experience for Guy, who is really running into, there's never been a reach in the family system. That was the meaning that was showing up for him extremely intensely.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if we had just done, we were talking before, Christina, about correcting people, I could have said, there's no such thing. We know somewhere in that family, at some point, there's been a reach. Come on, right? That wouldn't have worked. His system, and even Guy now would say, of course there is. I mean, at some level, there had, maybe we've got to go back a million years, probably not that far, right? At the intellectual level, Guy would agree with me. But in that moment, the meaning of there's never been an uninterrupted reach in my family system, and I can't feel it, was what he was experiencing.
Mm-hmm.
So I wasn't gonna make any move that was contradicting. Oh, just try to reach a little bit. Just a little bit. Just try to reach a little bit, just with your finger. I could just feel that would bounce me right out of rapport. So I think if I remember the two things I tried, one was, would you please just look at life? And that didn't fix anything, but it had positive effect. Not looking is, if you can get somebody to look at somebody, often that's they're like, oh, she's not as scary as I thought she was going to be.
Mm-hmm.
Huh, this is kind of workable. Huh, that's really confusing. Huh. That kind of experience that we've all seen in constellations. So, and the second thing was so here's the thing. One of the rules that I learned that I think Jade learned, and you probably learned and Peter learned, is that in the case of an interrupted reach, you've got to get the client to reach first. Because if you don't, then they really don't get over the interrupted reach. There's a lot of wisdom to this, but I've seen now thousands of constellations, and sometimes it just is the other way. The big one has to reach first.
Yeah.
And I can't give you a rule for this. You've just got to feel the system.
The big one, the parent.
Well, in this case, it was life.
Uh-huh.
The bigger one.
Right.
In the interaction. It's usually going to be the parent, but it could be the grandparent, or it could be, the ancient German ancestor, whatever it is you're trying to, the reach you're trying to work with, right? That the client's doing some version of this too, right? And it's not workable for them.
Uh-huh.
It's not helping them. And you've tried all your things around, encouraging them to reach, and their safety is going, this is dangerous. And you've fixed everything about the big one, and they feel safe, but the client's still not feeling safe. Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
And for whatever reason, the meaning I just tap into, whatever got broken here or distorted here, they need to feel the reach from the big one first. And sometimes it's the other way around. Sometimes the smaller one needs to reach first. So I now just leave this as for you to sort of feel. And sometimes it's, you ask the client to do it, they say, screw you, and it gets worse. And that's being trauma informed, is noticing when it's gotten worse, when the move you're trying feels unsafe, and don't do it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
This is not, I've gotten to a place where I never try moves. Let me put it in the positive. I still do moves that sometimes end up feeling dangerous to people, and I have to backtrack.
Mm-hmm.
There's no time when you're going to get there. It's reacting to the feedback in the system.
Mm-hmm.
I just increased the danger in the system by making them stand closer. How about you guys take a step apart now?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Now, there can be useful tensions. You can just feel the difference between them. It's like, just try looking at her in the eye. Ooh. Huh. It's not as bad as it feels weird, but I'm not going, that feels really unsafe to me.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Yeah. This is trauma informed. This is watching the safety increase or decrease, mostly in the client, but also in other people, because you're working with other dyads and triads and other parts, that you're working on, and their trauma energy, right? And if you're sort of building up the trauma energy, then you can't get anywhere. Okay. What did I mean by this? This was something I noticed that didn't happen. It happened a little bit. It happened very softly and very beautifully. So remember, Jade kept reminding you are in the role of when it was safe to reach in your system.
Yeah.
She kept on reminding you, and Gaia's exhibit A for like that wasn't what was happening, right? But all of you had at least a little bit or a lot of moments where that role didn't feel convincing. And this is a really good example, particularly when you have, no particular about, when the role and its meaning, how it's been set, which has been just fine and well done, collides in some way with the actual representative, or in this case, client, who doesn't feel safe. So most of us in this room don't feel safe reaching fully, or there are at least circumstances where we don't feel safe reaching. Mm-hmm. And it's not going to immediately get blotted out just because we stepped into a role. Mm-hmm. But now there's going to be kind of a useful tension where these two got to kind of cross-communicate in some way. Now, if the container wasn't set well, it would have just been censored out. And we would have had a lot of, upset people in the room, mm-hmm. right? But if the container's set well and there's goodwill and overall the systemics feel safe, then there's going to be kind of a useful, like, back and forth, right? Where the you and your safety patterning, your interrupted reach encounters this like remarkable experience of like, there's no problem with reaching. That's kind of cool. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And then you get to sit down with all of this. And, yeah. So I just want to note that if you're like, how come we didn't all feel safe? Right? If the role worked, if the label worked, why didn't we all just feel safe immediately? It's because you're still a person in a body having your experience. Mm-hmm. Yeah? I just wanted to note that. If we don't take, life can't give. I just really want to. Oh, and I love this. One of the things said at the end, we are exactly what life wanted and intended. Mm. Very nice. Oh, and here's the other thing that showed up in here. Sorry. This is really important stuff. So in the beginning, parents, sorry, gonna freak you all out, equals life.
Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. As one of our teachers put it, the parents are the gods and goddesses of our universe. Mm-hmm. So our experience of our parents is what determines what we think and feel about life. So parents are dangerous, life is dangerous. Mm-hmm. Parents are safe and nurturing, life is safe and nurturing. Parents are unpredictable, life is unpredictable, right? That sort of thing. Now, as we grow up, we realize parents don't equal life. They're not the same thing, right? But the wiring is still kind of all there, right? Which is why there were some interesting moments of some overlap with life and parents yesterday as well. It's like the model, right, for life. And again, what we had was a very useful kind of tension now between the two. So as you got a cleaner experience of life and reaching to life, some of you got an improvement in your parents. I heard some of you reporting out like, oh, I'm seeing my dad a little differently now.
Mhm.
You know?
Yes.
That felt really good to you, right? So again, this is something you can use. Yeah.
And what is the second phrase? We are exactly what life wanted and intended.
Yeah. That was just a quote that came up from one of the representatives. I'm changing it a little bit, but I think it said, "You were what I wanted, as you are." It was kind of, yeah, okay. And then the last thing I just want to offer up, which we haven't talked about yet, it's been implied with this the connected unknown stuff, but I really want to name this because it's so important, which is the communal aspect of trauma. Our trauma is always embedded in a system, in a context, in a community, right? A large degree to which today's traumas, the last 50 or 100 years, are kind of unique is based on this really demented model of parenting we have these days, where we leave it in the hands of two people, if we're lucky, to take care of one or two or three or four or five kids, and we've lost the whole village piece of raising kids, where there are aunties and uncles and lots of people to get kids through this experience. You know, it is too much for two people, actually. The parents nod their heads. And then we have a single parent, you know, all this stuff, right? And this is true for everything. If we can hold our traumas, let me go back, our injuries and wounds and tragedies in community, they don't become traumas, right? That's why it's a bummer. Our death rituals suck these days. They're terrible, right? Our grieving rituals, we don't have them anymore. You know, I want to hire, when someone dies in my life, I want to hire those 10 women to ululate for 30 days. You know, just, you know, right? Because then that echoes what's going on in your heart. That's how I feel. My heart's breaking like those voices, right? We are so isolated, right? And so on our own. If someday read Bowling Alone, which is the seminal sort of study on how isolated we've gotten in our culture these days. Having said that, that means that there's an implied solution. And this is, I think, one of the reasons why constellations are so powerful, is that because they're systemic, they're people, they're groups, and also the invisible ones, the ancestors, the dead, the whomever, we're having a community experience of witnessing. And so in terms of the, you know, how do you work with trauma? Having a constellation is actually a trauma-informed experience without even knowing anything about trauma by its very nature. One of the things I've been chewing on is the work of Ed Tick on vets. Beautiful book. He's not a constellation person, but this is a book worth reading to really be informed about vets, who you will either meet a lot in your work, or the children of them you will meet a lot in your work. And his book is very systemically informed, even though he's not a constellation person.
What's the name of his book?
He has several. I think Wounded Warrior is one of them. But he goes into the warrior archetype, which is supposedly about protecting and defending, right? That's the original, like, archetype. And that what happens is when a 17 or 18-year-old goes off to war, he gets initiated into the warrior archetype. He does when he comes back, he or she sometimes, more and more she these days, when they come back, they're warriors. End of story. They are different. Their identity is changed. And yet the son comes back and we say, oh, now you can be a dad and brother now. and you can drop all that stuff. And this incongruence comes into this kid who's had probably moral injury because we fight wars so immorally. And they know they did not live up to the warrior ideal in the first place, which is about protect and defending. And they've been asked to do horrible things by their leaders and blah, blah, and they've been through all this trauma. And they come back and we say, it's so nice to have you back to be a father and worker and brother and son.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're actually part of the injury to these guys because they've been initiated into something new and we don't welcome them back as the warriors. They will be now forever. Yeah. And what he does is he takes these guys out on retreats with people who are not warriors. He's very intentional. He'll bring half people who are not soldiers, who are not connected to it, and half who are, and he takes them through like a week-long retreat where these young men are formally, gets me, initiated into the community as changed young men and honored and given the task of continuing to be warriors for peace in their communities. And they are honored for the loss that was involved, the sacrifice that was involved, and the gift they gave. And they get to tell their stories about how they were betrayed by their leaders and whatever else went into this. And they are honored back as who they are. And there's a kind of a beautiful sentence where he has them say, I am a warrior. I accept the choices I made on this path and the sacrifices it involved. And I commit myself going forward to be in service as a warrior to this community. Now imagine if you have a wound or injury in your life where you could do some version of that.
It's powerful.
I am a sexual abuse survivor. I honor the choices I've made on my path and the sacrifices that have been part of it and the injuries that have come. And I commit myself to service to the community as initiated into this person I am now. Yeah. And we might need to figure out the language and all that stuff, right? But there's something here that I've been really chewing on, this initiation piece into a new identity as a result of what we're calling trauma, but it doesn't have to be called trauma. It can just be called identity change, like injury that changed who we are and who we bring to what we bring to the world. And we're not going to be different. We're not going to go back to who we were. Yeah? And this gives us dignity. Right? It gives us, it's really powerful business. I did a half-day retreat with him at the conference down in San Diego.
Tick.
Yeah, and it was, he includes vets, and then he says people who are first responders. And there was one other category. I can't remember. That he kind of, people who have experienced war, whether as refugees or whatever. He includes those people who've, it's like extreme violence sort of thing. And there were about 10 people in the room out of the 50 who identified with this definition, and we acknowledged them as warriors. And it was really just crazy, remarkable stuff. Yeah. And constellations can do this. Yeah.
And veterans is like a huge issue.
Oh, it's a huge issue.
And so many suicides.
Yeah, and it's a really broken part of our culture right now. Yeah.
I really like how you kind of reframed it, the warriors for peace.
Yeah.
Because it's still the warrior, but it's just like,
we need people who can fight.
Yeah, honoring all that energy in them and all that training and like what they are, and then just saying like using it for the good of all.
Swords into plowshares.
Yeah.
There's a program in Taos where vets come with a female companion for a whole week.
Yeah.
And it can be a sister,
She's
a
not
partner,
showing it.
just
It's not showing it.
Really, you can, don't,
Sorry.
and it
sorry,
doesn't,
don't worry
doesn't
about it.
matter who I mean, someone really close to them that they care about. That's
Yeah.
all they need. And I'm like, well, when you said that this guy brings in people who aren't warriors, is it always males? I mean, that's this question of,
Well, and the warriors are not all men.
right? Yeah,
So it's a mix. It's all a mix. And with that, I'm going to invite a break. I
yeah.
think she made it very clear.
She just
We're
took a
well
break.
past the break.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I've gone too long with the talk.